You keep chasing desire, but every time it's over, you feel emptier than before. Maybe what you call freedom is just your fear wearing perfume. And today, you're going to see why Carl Jung believed that lust is the shadow's most seductive disguise. You don't actually want the body. You want the relief, the escape, the momentary silence inside your head after another long day of pretending you're fine. Lust isn't your problem. It's your symptom. And this might be the first time someone dares to tell you, you're not addicted to pleasure. You're exhausted from the absence of meaning. Carl Jung understood this better than anyone. To him, compulsive desire wasn't just instinct. It was exile. It was the cry of a self that's been buried under shame, repression, and masks you were forced to wear just to survive. You were taught to suppress your instincts, then punished for not knowing how to manage them. You were conditioned to believe that control was strength. Yet now, you feel weakest when you're trying to feel most alive. That paradox is not a flaw in you. It's a flaw in the way your psyche was trained to betray itself. And here's the catch. Lust isn't about sex. It's about the part of you that never got to exist fully. The one who was never validated, never chosen, never truly seen. So now, it hides behind intensity, behind touch, behind conquest. But every time the moment ends, you're left staring at a mirror you can't stand, because the reflection never changes. That's not passion. That's spiritual starvation. Modern psychology at Harvard found that the brain treats repressed trauma and short-term pleasure almost identically. The same circuits fire, which means most people aren't pursuing pleasure. They're medicating their wounds. Your desire isn't evil. It's a code, a signal, a breadcrumb from the part of your mind begging to be acknowledged, not judged. Lust, when unexamined, becomes addiction. But when integrated, it becomes power. Because here's the truth, you never wanted to dominate. You just wanted to stop feeling like you're at the mercy of everything. But the body can't save you when the soul is still in hiding. And no number of bodies will make you feel whole if what you truly crave is not contact, but clarity. You thought liberation meant indulging. But what if true freedom begins the moment you stop needing to be desired? You think you're choosing, but look closer. You're reacting to loneliness, to shame, to that echo of rejection from years ago that never really left. Jung warned us, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. Every impulsive night, every craving, every urge that pulls you back into the same hollow cycle, it's not fate, it's forgotten pain, wearing the mask of pleasure. And here's the reason you've never broken free. Because nobody told you that lust is not the enemy. Denying it is. You've been at war with yourself, calling your hunger a sin, when in fact, it was your soul's language, distorted my silence. So yes, you will never let lust win again after this. Not because you'll suppress it, but because you'll finally understand what it really wanted to tell you. Shall we go deeper? You don't crave their body. You crave what disappears for a few seconds when it's touching yours. The silence of being wanted. The illusion of being enough, even if it's just for a moment. That's the part that hurts the most, isn't it? That the fact that you know this, and yet you keep doing it. Because it's not weakness, it's programming. You grew up in a world that taught you presence only had value if it provoked desire. That your worth could be measured by the reaction you sparked in someone else's eyes. And over time, you didn't just internalize this, you became it. You shaped your identity around the impact you had on others. Which means every time you're alone, you're not just bored, you're unvalidated, unmirrored. You vanish. This is how lust becomes your only form of proof that you still exist. The body becomes a performance, the desire a drug, And like any drug, it stops working the moment the high fades. But the worst part, you keep returning to it. Not because you're evil, but because a part of you still believes this is the only kind of love you're allowed to feel. The one that comes fast, burns hard, and leaves nothing. That's the trap. The seduction isn't just in the other's touch, it's in the momentary annihilation of your own emptiness. But Jung would say, that emptiness isn't a flaw, it's the shadow. And when you reject it, it finds new ways to control you. Lust isn't the villain. It's the mask of every feeling you've been forced to suppress. Abandonment, invisibility, guilt, rage. When those emotions have no voice, they return as cravings, sharper, louder, and harder to resist. But here's the rupture. What if you're not actually the one choosing? What if every time you act on that impulse, it's not you? It's the part of you that was neglected for so long, it no longer trusts silence. And what if that part is lying to you? Because here's something most people won't admit. The aftermath hurts more than the pleasure ever heals. You look at yourself differently. You feel smaller, disconnected. Like you gave something away, and not because someone took it, but because you no longer know how to hold it. Your own presence has become too heavy. So you keep outsourcing relief. Lust becomes the fastest exit from a room you no longer know how to stand in. But you're here, still listening, still confronting, and that means something. That means some part of you still wants to reclaim what was taken, not by others, but by the lies you had to believe to feel safe. You were told that being desirable is enough, but you were never taught how to desire yourself in silence, without an audience. If this truth struck you in any way, if it echoed what you've been carrying alone, help me keep this work alive. Like the video, subscribe to the channel. It's not just support, it's a way of saying, I'm still here, and I choose awareness. We're not done yet, because what comes next is the hardest mirror of all. What if the desire you chase is actually a punishment you keep choosing? You weren't born broken. You were made to feel fragmented. And now, the desire that haunts you is just the echo of that fracture, disguised as pleasure. What you call lust isn't raw instinct. It's a cry for reintegration, and that's why it owns you. Because it's not about the other person, it's about the part of yourself you keep disowning. Carl Jung didn't see lust as sin. He saw it as shadow, a psychic blind spot, a force that gains power precisely because you avoid looking at it. And the more you try to control it through suppression, the more it slicks through the cracks of your silence, commanding your actions from beneath the surface. Jung warned us, what you resist persists. But more dangerously, it disguises itself. Lust, when not examined, becomes the ghost of everything you've been taught to repress. Your anger, your unmet needs, your unspoken wounds. You think you're seeking touch, but what you're actually craving is wholeness. You want to feel united, real, anchored, because you've spent years being reduced to a function, a provider, a performer, a presence meant to serve others' hunger. Lust gives you, even briefly, the illusion of being the one in control, but that illusion costs you more than it gives. And here's the paradox Jung exposes. The more you pursue lust to escape emptiness, the more you feed that very emptiness. Because you're not integrating the shadow, you're running from it. Every time you give in without understanding, you abandon yourself again. You give power to the wound and call it desire. You wear your trauma like perfume, hoping someone will finally notice. But they only smell the performance, never the pain beneath. Think of it like this. You're not possessed by lust. You're haunted by everything you repressed. The desire isn't your enemy. But when you use it to bypass your suffering instead of confronting it, you become a stranger to your own instincts. You mistake compulsion for authenticity, and that confusion keeps you stuck. Not because you're weak, but because you were never taught to read the language of your own psyche. And that's where real transformation begins. Not in controlling your desire, but in listening to it. Not obeying, not indulging, but decoding. What does this craving want to protect me from? What does it whisper that I'm too afraid to say out loud? Jung believed that the shadow contains all the life you weren't allowed to live. And when you avoid it, it finds expression through your behaviors, your obsessions, your addictions, your silent suffering. But here's the hardest part. You've probably confused your shadow with your identity. You think this hunger defines you. You think these patterns are who you are. But they're just the armor, the noise, the camouflage your mind built to survive in a world that didn't give you permission to be whole. So ask yourself this, and ask it honestly. When was the last time you felt truly alive without needing to be seen, desired, or touched? If that question feels uncomfortable, that's where the work begins. Because the goal isn't to eliminate desire. It's to take back authorship over it. And that requires something no one taught you. Stillness, not as passivity, but as power. Because silence, in a world that conditions you to perform, is the loudest form of self-respect. We've barely scratched the surface. Because next, we're going to tear apart a myth that's been chaining you for years. That you're the one in control. You think you're the one choosing. But real freedom doesn't feel like this. Not like aftermath soaked in regret. Not like silence that tastes like shame. If this was control, you wouldn't feel hijacked by your own mind every time the craving returns. So let's be honest. Maybe lust isn't your decision. Maybe it's your reaction. You've been told that desire equals power. That being wanted means you're winning. That pleasure is proof of your dominance. But look at your patterns. Look closely. Who really owns who in this equation? Because what if you're not pursuing? What if you're being pulled? Not by the other person, by the wound, the one that never healed, the one that learned to speak in the only language you were never taught to decode, compulsion. This is the inversion Jung warned us about. When the unconscious remains unexamined, it takes over. It drives you, masks itself as instinct. But it's not instinct, it's adaptation. A desperate attempt to regulate pain through stimulation. But stimulation without presence isn't intimacy. It's anesthesia. And that's the real danger. You're not feeding a need. You're numbing a scream. And it gets worse. Because the world applauds your performance. It romanticizes your disconnection. It sells lust as liberation while silently watching you implode. They want you to confuse chaos with confidence. To associate intensity with depth. But deep isn't frantic. Deep is still. And if you can't sit in your own stillness without needing to be touched, chased, or validated, then maybe you're not free. Maybe you're just really good at escaping. It's not about guilt. It's about lucidity. Because you've been conditioned to perform your desires instead of questioning them. To wear seduction like a crown without noticing that it's made of thorns. The more you reach, the more you bleed. And that's what nobody says out loud. Lust becomes self-harm when it's used to punish the part of you that never got love without proving value. That's why you keep returning to the same type of dynamic. The ones that start hot and end hollow. The ones where you give everything but feel less every time. This isn't just about who you attract. It's about what you tolerate. Because deep down, you still believe that's all you deserve. Not because you want to, but because your emotional blueprint was written in survival, not sovereignty. And here's the fracture point. When you surrender to lust unconsciously, you're not being alive. You're disappearing. You dissolve into the moment, hoping that if the intensity is high enough, the ache will vanish. But pain doesn't dissolve like that. It morphs. It waits. It finds a new mask, and each time it costs you a piece of your dignity. Carl Jung would call this a betrayal of the self. Not because desire is wrong, but because using it to avoid integration is self-abandonment disguised as ecstasy. You don't need to eliminate lust. You need to reclaim authorship over it. And that means confronting the part of you that still associates pleasure with punishment. So ask yourself, when did lust become your apology for feeling broken? When did you start using your body to say what your voice was never allowed to scream? Because that's the real war. Not between you and your desire, but between the part of you that wants to vanish and the one that's begging to finally be whole. And the scariest truth? Maybe you've never actually tasted freedom. Just different flavors of captivity, dressed as choice. Let's keep going. Because what comes next is the moment you stop blaming lust and start facing the pain it's been hiding. There's a reason it keeps happening. Not just the desire, but the drop that follows. That cold, invisible crash when it's over. The kind that leaves you staring at nothing, questioning why it never feels like enough. You think you're broken, but the truth is far more precise. You're reenacting something, over and over, until it finally reveals what it's really about. Lust is rarely about sex. It's about touch, but not the physical kind. It's about being felt, being known, being wanted without needing to perform. And when you spent years, maybe a lifetime, being valued only for what you offer, not who you are, lust becomes a way to simulate that feeling. Even if it's false, even if it hurts, even if it leaves you emptier than before. There is a trauma here that no one talks about. The trauma of never being fully chosen, of being used, admired, desired, but never emotionally held. That trauma doesn't scream. It seduces. It whispers through your choices. It pulls you into dynamics where you chase validation in bodies that can't carry your truth. Because what you're truly longing for isn't intensity, it's presence. But presence requires vulnerability, and that terrifies the parts of you still in survival mode. Carl Jung said that what we don't bring to consciousness returns as fate, but he wasn't talking about destiny. He meant repetition. You keep finding yourself in same emotional aftermaths, because some part of you is still hoping for a different ending, still believing that maybe this time, if you give enough, prove enough, perform enough, you'll finally feel complete. But this is where the shift begins. You have to stop using your pain as currency. You have to stop bargaining your body in exchange for the illusion of mattering. Because here's the secret. When you give from your wound, you attract people who feed on it. And not because they're evil, but because that's the frequency you're unconsciously radiating. Lack, hunger, disconnection disguised as desire. You were not made to survive on scraps of affection. But no one taught you how to sit with yourself long enough to realize that. No one told you that the body can be a shield, not just a gift. That silence can be protection, not punishment. That saying no isn't rejection. It's realignment. The kind that returns you to your center. The kind that breaks the pattern. So here's the tool. And it's not flashy. It's not loud. It's a limit. A sacred one. One that says, I won't use lust to negotiate my worth anymore. I won't confuse being desired with being safe. I won't offer access to parts of me I haven't yet learned to respect. Because you teach the world how to treat you by how you treat yourself in your most silent moments. And this isn't about shame. It's about sovereignty, about finally choosing what no one else could ever give you, authorship over your own energy. You don't need to punish yourself with desire. You need to honor yourself with boundaries. Quiet ones, internal ones. The kind that don't scream, I'm healing, but quietly declare, I no longer bleed for love. This is the moment where everything starts to shift, where lust stops being your escape and starts becoming your teacher. You're not a sinner. You're a cage that forgot it used to be a bird. That's what lust does when it takes over unconsciously. It traps you in rituals that feel like freedom, but are really rehearsals of your own abandonment. You spread your wings, but never leave the ground. You touch, but never connect. You burn, but never become light. There's a moment, right after the intensity fades, when your soul whispers the truth. That this wasn't what you wanted. That it felt good, but not real. That you were trying to become unforgettable to someone else, while slowly forgetting yourself. And that's the tragedy no one talks about. You can lose yourself piece by piece and still look radiant on the outside. Because lust, when it's disconnected from meaning, becomes a costume, and you wear it so well. The laughter, the charm, the unspoken hope that maybe this time the performance will turn into something lasting. But it never does, because you're not being seen. You're being consumed, and deep down you know the difference. Carl Jung would call this an identity crisis of the soul. The moment when the persona, the mask you built to survive, becomes heavier than the truth it hides. You're not addicted to bodies. You're addicted to the mirror they offer. A mirror you desperately need, because your own reflection has become unbearable. But a mirror can't hold you. It can only show you what you're still refusing to become. So here's the metaphor. You're like a song trapped in a loop. Beautiful, intense, repetitive, but unfinished. Every interaction becomes another replay of the same unresolved note, a longing for closure disguised as conquest. You're not weak. You're caught in a pattern, and patterns don't break through willpower. They break through awareness. That awareness begins when you finally ask, what am I really seeking when I crave lust? Not what I think I want, but what my pain is trying to remember. Because at the root of every impulsive desire is a memory, a fracture, a moment when you weren't chosen, heard, or held. And the body remembers that. It rewrites the wound into appetite. But no matter how much you feed it, it stays hungry. Because hunger isn't the issue, it's identity. You were never taught how to hold your own silence, how to feel whole without performing, how to be sacred to yourself without needing another body to validate your existence. And that absence became an ache, one you dressed in desire, hoping no one would notice it was actually grief. So here's the truth. You don't need more pleasure. You need a new posture. One that no longer bends to be seen. One that no longer craves applause for simply being alive. One that remembers that dignity isn't about withdrawal. It's about choosing where you plant your fire. You've been burning for attention. It's time to burn for clarity. And if that image stays with you, let it. Because the cage was never locked. You were just afraid of what would happen if you stopped singing for others. What comes next is the moment you face the reason you were trapped in the first place, and the cruel belief that maybe this was all you were ever worth. You've mistaken your hunger for your identity. That's the final illusion lust creates. It doesn't just hijack your body. It rewires your sense of self. Makes you believe you are the craving. That the ache defines you. That without it, you are no one. But the truth is far more unsettling. You've built your emotional compass around a need that was never yours to carry. You think desire is your power. But if it leaves you powerless when it's over, was it ever yours? Real power doesn't drain you. It doesn't make you feel smaller, ashamed, or invisible after it's done. Real power remains. Even in silence. Especially in silence. That's what they never told you. You were trained to be visible, not to be whole. Trained to be wanted, not to be respected. You mastered the art of being chosen, but no one taught you how to choose yourself without an audience. So you confuse being seen with being safe. And now, every desire that enters your body feels like a test you must pass to prove your value again. Carl Jung believed that until the psyche integrates its shadow, it will continue to recreate suffering, not because it enjoys pain, but because the pain holds the message. The very thing you've been avoiding through lust is the very key to your freedom. But you keep running from it, not because you're afraid of pain, but because deep down, you're terrified of meeting the version of yourself that doesn't beg to be desired. Because who are you without the need to be touched? Without the craving to be needed? Who are you when no one's watching? If the answer scares you, that's the wound speaking. You've built a fortress on the sand of others' attention. Every time the tide rises, you rebuild. Exhausted, hopeful, deluded. And each collapse feels personal, but it's not. It's structural. It's the architecture of a life designed around external validation. And lust was the most beautiful tool it used to keep you building. But here's the breaking point. You no longer have to perform. You no longer have to beg for the echo of presence in someone else's body. You no longer have to trade your silence for a few seconds of borrowed fire. Because the craving isn't real. What's real is your disconnection. The craving is just the symptom. And healing doesn't come from indulging it. Healing begins when you learn to observe it, not obey it. It's a subtle rebellion. A quiet refusal. The moment you feel the familiar pull and instead of reacting, you listen. You sit in the discomfort, not as a punishment, but as proof that your soul is remembering how to breathe without chasing smoke. This isn't about suppression. It's about sovereignty. It's about recognizing that pleasure without presence becomes poison. That not every hunger is meant to be fed. Some are meant to be faced. Some are meant to be unlearned. And when you do, you'll feel something new. Not a high, not a rush, but a presence. A kind of inner gravity that doesn't need to seduce, prove, or explain. That's when you'll know lust didn't destroy you. Escaping your shadow did. Now we arrive at the edge, the place where desire meets clarity, and you finally decide what gets to say. Lust was never the enemy. Denial was. And silence, not the healing kind, but the suffocating one, became the altar where you offered pieces of yourself, hoping someone would finally call it love. But they never did. Because what you were offering wasn't desire. It was absence. The absence of self. The absence of truth. The absence of a voice that could say, I am not here to be consumed. Carl Jung believed that real liberation comes not from perfection, but from integration. The moment when the parts you were taught to hide, your craving, your fear, your vulnerability, are no longer exiled, but honored, not obeyed, not indulged, but seen for what they really are, echoes of a deeper need, whispers from a self that was never allowed to fully exist. And that's why lust became so loud. It had to scream, because you weren't listening to the quieter pain beneath it. The longing to be respected. The hunger for emotional safety. The ache to be real without being rejected. But here's the catch. No one can give you that. Because no one can see you clearly if you've never dared to stand still in your own light. Søren Kierkegaard wrote that despair isn't the loss of something external. It's the refusal to become oneself. The true self. The self you abandoned every time you used your body to silence your truth. Every time you chose intensity over integrity. Every time you let someone enter, hoping they'd find what you couldn't. But your worth was never in the touch. It was in the stillness. The moments where you didn't have to earn affection to feel whole. And if you've never experienced that, if every act of closeness has been tied to fear, shame, or desperation, then of course you confuse lust with power. Because it's the only language your wound was ever taught to speak. But now, you know better. You've seen the architecture of your desire. You've traced the thread back to the beginning, to the moment where you stopped being a person and became a performance. But you're not here to perform anymore. You're here to reclaim, slowly, quietly, fully. That doesn't mean rejecting desire. It means choosing when it's real, when it's aligned, when it's no longer a cover for your ache, but an expression of your wholeness. And that changes everything. So this is the end of the pattern, the moment you walk away, not from pleasure, but from the lie that you needed to be consumed in order to be seen, because you were never meant to burn for others. You were meant to stand in your own fire and not be afraid of its heat. If any part of this pierced the silence you've been living with, leave a comment below. Help this message reach who needs it. Subscribe to the channel, not for us, but as a declaration. I choose awareness, because here's the final truth. You will never let lust win again. Not because you're stronger, but because you're finally lucid. And the symbol you must carry forward is this. The locked door was never outside of you. You held the key the entire time. But you kept handing it to strangers, hoping one of them would come back to save you. Now, it's yours again. What will you do with it?